One, two, three. My name is Joe Austin. Scéalta is a joint production with Fáilte Fears to Hear and Féileann Fogel. And my guest today is someone who most people know or know bits and pieces about. And over the last while, when we've been trying to organise this interview, I've been explaining to people who my guest is, and they've described her in a variety of ways. Some have said she's the woman who speaks Irish from East Belfast. Is that her? Or others have said she's involved in the GAA movement. Is that her? So rather than me give an explanation who Linda Ervine is, let's Linda Ervine do it. Linda, welcome to Scéalta.
And it's lovely to be here.
Do you often get described as the woman who speaks Irish from East Belfast?
I do, yeah.
well, let's get all of that out of the road. So I know that you're someone who your whole life has been opposed to anyone putting labels on anyone else. So you're just simply not the woman who speaks Irish. You're simply not the wife of Brian and the brother-in-law. So you're all of that. Sorry, I should say the sister-in-law of David Ervine. So tell us.
Yeah, well, I certainly had a life before I met my husband Brian, because Brian's my second husband. So I had lived quite a life before I met him. I'm from East Belfast originally. My family are members of the Communist Party, so that was very much a backdrop to my childhood. I suppose for me, in many ways, I didn't know there was anything different about that or anything strange about that. It was always sort of USSR, were letters that were instantly recognisable to me. A number of my families had visited Russia. There was always sort of Russian memorabilia around the house. Lenin was on the wall, and there was a statue of Lenin on my nanny's wee dresser in a kitchen house in Thistle Street. As a child, I was taken over to the Russian boats because my granda was the secretary of the Soviet Friendly Society. There was always sort of party people, you know, my nanny and my granda, it was the party. They talked about the party. They never said the Communist Party, it was always the party. And there was party people and the party rooms and the party this and the party that. So, you know, though I was never involved in it, it was always just something that was there. And it was only later, I suppose, when I became a teenager, that I started to realise that there was something strange about this and that other people didn't really like it. And I suppose too, you know, by then we were in the Troubles. I would have been 7 when the Troubles started. And there was always, again, it wasn't something that was told to me, but you recognised there was a sense of threat around the family. So these were all, I suppose, the backdrop to me. Also, when I was 11, my mother and father, their marriage broke up when I was quite young. And when I was 11, my father was living up in Twinbrook, and I went to live with him. Now, it was a massive shock for an 11-year-old to come from, you know, a loyalist estate up to a Republican state. And it was very difficult for me to get my kind of head around that. It was the first time I was ever at the receiving end of sectarianism, because although nobody really said anything to me, you know, a lot of the kids wouldn't have played with me because I was a Protestant. And my first boyfriend I met when I was in Twinbrook, Jim Brennan, and I remember being down in his house, and his mother didn't want me in the house, and I remember her saying, "Why can they live there? We were put out of the Craigie." And I didn't know why did she blame me? You know, why was that my fault?
I've always had great admiration for people of the left who live in areas where they are different and they don't follow the kind of the tribal path. I lived in Kerrykill as a child, and I remember distinctly during one of the weeks of the men's mission, men from that mission been incited by a priest, a visiting priest, to go and protest outside the home of a member of the Communist Party. So Communist Party comrades really were up against it nearly wherever they lived. And then if you add that to a child going and been sectarianly abused in a nationalist area. Did it have? Are you conscious? Did it have any effect on you? Did it make you rebellious? Did it make you tougher? Did it frighten you?
I think there was always a lot of confusion for me in my childhood, and that was partly, because of the family politics, because of our troubles, and because the fact that my mother and father's marriage had broken up when I was quite young. And, my mother was from a Presbyterian background, but her mother was a Catholic. And so that they were very, I suppose, conservative in their politics, very different from my father's people. So there was always that kind of tension between the two, and the inability to understand, when you're a teenager, you're surrounded by a peer group who are telling you one thing, and yet, you have a knowledge that there's something else, but you can't really talk about that. So I think for me as a teenager, there was an awful lot of confusion, which did end up with me being very rebellious. I didn't fit in at school. I got expelled from school. I didn't educate myself properly. I just, went down a wrong path, I suppose, at that age. I became pregnant just before my 16th birthday and had a baby at 16, became a single parent. And I think in many ways I felt very hopeless at that time. I suffered then with mental illness, depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, and it took me a long, long time, I suppose, to stabilise myself and to kind of know what I was about. So yeah, just a lot of my early life was about not fitting in and about being very confused about my own values. And
as a man, although I am a father, but as a man, I can't really imagine the impact of a 16-year-old child having another child to look after and to care for. How difficult was that? Was it a lonely experience, a frightening experience?
it was both, because in many ways, although I'd been a very rebellious teenager, I was also, I suppose, in many ways a very naive, very young, very damaged teenager. And I didn't have a terribly stable home life at that time in my life. So it was difficult. One of the things I remember really it was very hard was, because this was 1978, we were still living in a very conservative Northern Ireland. And I had my daughter in City Hospital. And at night when the fathers came, because it was only fathers visiting, so I wasn't, I didn't have a father to come up and visit. So that was very difficult. That was very hard. And, and I suppose knowing you were the subject of gossip and things like that. And I remember my mother saying to me, nobody will ever want you, because I had got pregnant, because those were the sort of attitudes people had then, and you didn't know any different. You didn't know any other world. Northern Ireland, as I say, was still extremely parochial and still very much behind the times, But I loved my daughter and I didn't want to give her up. And I remember too, when I was actually in labour, a nurse came in and said, are you keeping your baby? And I said, yeah. And they said, no, that's okay. It's just so as we would know whether to take her away or not. And I was really horrified by that. But actually, in Belfast City Hospital, on another ward, there was a girl whose baby was down the corridor because I remember she was from Sandy Row or somewhere, because her father wouldn't let her bring the baby home. So awful stories.
At what stage did you leave Twinbrook? And did you leave Twinbrook to go back into the east of the city, or where did you go after that?
Yeah, I sort of floated about because I lived, my mother was in Beaver and my grandparents were on Newtonards Road, so I kind of lived between the two, and I went to school in East Belfast. I went to Park Parade. So I left Twinbrook probably then when I was about 12 or so. I spent a short time in Kerr, and then I went back. As I say, I lived between my mother's house and my grandparents' house.
you said that you were, and I can imagine you've been a rebellious young girl, but was that out of a sense of trying to prove to people that you were more daring than them, or was it because you had to be Linda? You had to establish who you were because there was so much uncertainty around where you lived, where you came from, your parents splitting up, all of that. So, what was driving this rebellious nature?
I think I was just very lost. When I had been young, as I say, my father left when I was 7, and that really did have a very devastating effect on me. And I know it was very difficult times for my mother, and just there was a lot of issues at home, at that time. And I was kind of went between my grandparents and my mother's house. For a while, we had to go and live with my mother's people up on the Crumlin Road. My mother's, my grandmother on my mother's side was a widow woman, and it was very obvious that we weren't welcome there and we weren't wanted there. And it was a difficult time. I had to change schools, and and everything that was familiar to us was just overnight, just our whole lives changed. And I suppose, this was 1969, just as the Troubles were breaking out, August 1969, which is sort of strange, when my parents' marriage broke up. And in those days, nobody explained to children what was happening, so we didn't understand why we were lifted out of our home and taken to a strange place, why we had to change schools, why all of a sudden, my father was the enemy. We didn't know, and as I say, nobody ever sat us down and explained. So I just remember, I think that was the sort of catalyst for the future. I remember awful feelings walking home from school one day, and I heard a fire brigade, and I remember thinking, maybe my granny's house had burnt down, and that would be a good thing. And then feeling the terrible guilt, that if anything happened, that would be my fault. And I also, in many ways, as a child, I thought it was my fault that my parents' marriage broke up. I didn't understand why, but I always felt that I was to blame, Yeah. So then later on, growing up, I didn't get on with my mother's new partner, and that caused a lot of issues. And so I think it was just, for me, an awful time of just confusion, just a person who was very lost. And in those days, nobody spoke to teenagers. You were just labelled a troublemaker. There was never any idea that you were having problems. Just why didn't you fit in? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you go to school? Why did you smoke? Why did you drink? Why did you ever? But I was always just going to find something else to distract myself with and to stay away from home.
A young mother, a young girl who is a mother with a baby. And I'm sure there must have been many nights crying and wondering and waking up and not sleeping and all of that. But was there somewhere in it that gave you that sense that this wee baby had to be looked after and it was you or no one else? Was that a turning point, or was it a stabilizing factor in your young life?
It was very much because before I had my daughter Kelly, I think I would have been the typical teenager, taking risks, doing foolish things. And then once I got pregnant, there was a need to kind of, I suppose, look after yourself. And because you did have this other life inside you. And then when she was born and whatnot, there was somebody else. And, again, I suppose it's a stereotypical thing. You had somebody else to love and somebody else that loved you. So that was a very important turning point, and it did change me as a person, and it changed the direction of my life. I left home for the last time. Then I got a house beside my grandparents in Beachfield Street on the Newtonard Road, and then I met the man who became my husband. We got married. We had another couple of children. And on the side, we lived beside my grandparents.
I hear your husband's a wonderful person, by the way.
Well, this is my ex-husband I'm talking about now. Because Brian's my second husband.
Well, I meant Brian actually, but we'll give them all a merit badge. Was there employment anywhere along the way? And I know that would have been
Not,
difficult with a
not,
child.
not for me. And, talking about work, that was also very difficult times because my ex-husband, when we met, he was working for Michelin Tire Factory. He had no education, he had no qualifications, so he was a labourer in the tire factory, but it was quite well paid. It was shift work. He did 3 different shifts a week, European shifts. In 1981, he was made redundant. Well, he didn't even get redundancy because he wasn't in the job 2 years, so he's one of the first ones to leave his job. That put us in a very difficult position because our income dropped drastically. We were living at the time in Westbourne Street, just a wee 2-up, 2-down house. We had 2 children, and shortly afterwards we had a third. We were on benefits and there was no work. I mean, there was absolutely no work whatsoever. At that time, you didn't even look in the paper for jobs. People were advertising themselves for, I'll do anything. As a labourer, he had no hope of getting work, and he was out of work probably for about 2 or 3 years before he got a job. Got it like one of the government schemes in Enterprise Ulster. And then after that, he got a job he was a bin man for the council and a road sweeper.
I'm just trying to tease out the idea, of your own teenage background. You're beginning to have a teenage family. You've obviously 3 children. Was there a sense in your head that they'll not do what I done? Was there a drive for instance? I know that you have a irresistible, inquisitive mind. I know that from speaking to you. But was there this sense that they'll do better than me, and I'll make sure they do?
If I'm honest, no, there wasn't, because again, and it was not something I'm proud of, it's not something I'm happy about, but it's just the truth. When my kids were young, I had the last one, I think when I was 22 or 23, I say the first one at 16, and life was just survival, Joe. It was just survival. It was not planning ahead. It was poverty, it was illness, there was violence, there was abuse. There was bad housing. It was just absolute survival,
What drove you, or what sustained you through all of this? What kept you going?
I think in the very darkest moments, and I'd say I suffered very severely with mental health issues. I mean, really severely. And I did try to commit suicide a number of times. But I think there was somewhere in my mind that I just knew this was not who I was, and this was not how life was always going to be. And I didn't know, because I'd had so little experience of life. I didn't even know, I'd never traveled. That sounds really ridiculous. I had never been out for like a meal, with my husband then. I'd never done any of those things. I'd never, I'd had children so young, and my life was in a house with no money, and just scraping and surviving. And, when I did work, I worked in the local chippy, or I worked as a cleaner, and I saw violence all around me. So I didn't think that my experience of life was any different. I just thought this is how life was. Somebody hit you when you didn't do what you were told. And, how could you change that? You were totally powerless to be able to change that. So there was no feeling with me that I wanted something better for my children. There was just a feeling with me that I have to get through today and I have to get through tomorrow.
Was there any one turning point? Because your life did turn, clearly turn. Was there any one, or was it a series of events?
There was a number of things that changed life. At 27, I took a nervous breakdown. And, people talk about having breakdowns, but, when you really do take a breakdown, you stop functioning. And when I look back now, I can totally understand why that happened, because, it was building and building until I just mentally couldn't cope anymore. And in that time, when that happened, I realised that I was going to lose my children. If I didn't get well, I wasn't going to have any control over their lives. So that motivated me to try and get well. I got help. I was a psychiatric nurse who came and visited me very regularly. And that was just having somebody to talk to, I think, was a major help. But it started a chain of events where I started to go out very, very close to home. I learned to drive. Again, I would only go around in East Belfast. But that allowed me to go to college, and I got involved in education. Education for me was like this door opening. It was terrifying. It was challenging because there was so many reasons. I was still very agoraphobic and socially phobic, but also, my experience of education had been very negative. But I'd always known that I was intelligent. I'd always known that I was clever. I had passed the 11 plus, at 11. I always knew that I had something, I suppose, but I'd never been able to use it. And education became such a positive thing for me. I think when people put an A on an essay that I'd written, all of a sudden for me, it was the first time in my life I felt valued. And it was almost like somebody saying, you're a good person. And I became addicted to that. I just wanted more of it. I couldn't get enough of it. I did GCSEs, I got all A's, and the college said, why don't you do an access course? At that time, I didn't even know what an access course was, but when I realised it was this qualification that took you into university, I immediately said no, because, the likes of me, I could never go to university. Plus, I was just collecting these bits of paper. I liked the certificates. I kept them in a little thing at home. I wasn't going to actually do anything with it. In fact, I did think at one time maybe I could get a job in an office, but I didn't know anybody that worked in an office. What did you do in an office? Could I be a person that worked in an office? It all seems ridiculous now, but this was very real for me at that stage in my life. So instead I did 3 A-levels. Then I went to university and I did a degree in English and I became a teacher.
I want to just take you back a wee bit. What Tony and I, who's doing the engineering in this part of the program, we would try to do is to find out a wee bit about the person. I mean, you said earlier on that being unwell wasn't who you were. It was just a part of something that you had no control over. But I was asking, and I'm not going to tell you, even off camera, I'm not going to tell you. I was asking someone about you, about your although I've known you quite a while, but about your personality. And the first thing they said was she's fiercely loyal. Fiercely loyal. And do you think is that an accurate picture of you?
I'm not sure who they say I'm fiercely loyal to.
Well, I think everybody you come into contact with, maybe. But that journey from the same as everybody else, in the same poverty trap, the same routine, the same survival, you then go off to become really an educationalist in terms of yourself, and then of course when you became a teacher. Did you leave behind friends, or did those friendships come with you? Were you able to maintain them?
Some, and it's a strange thing. When I was in college, I was so eager to change my life. I was so eager to change who I was. Everything I felt, everything about me, everything about my life was negative. And I wanted to be this other person. I wanted this education. And I remember going over to an event in Queens before I was at university, and it was a poetry event. And it was a Scottish working class female poet. And she read this poem about her own experience with education, where it was like traveling to a different country and all these new experiences, but part of you could never go back. And it was only after I came out of university and I got into teaching that I realised that that is the reality, that you do leave some people behind because they can no longer relate to you and you can no longer relate to them, and you move into this different world. And I don't think that's a positive thing in some ways. I remember the people I worked with in the chippy, even when I was getting involved in education, when I was doing A-levels, and they couldn't talk to me about it, and I couldn't talk to them about it because they didn't understand. I remember somebody saying to me one day, "What are you doing that for?" So it does, it changes something in you, and it changes something in their perception of you.
I think that's a very common experience with people who especially working class people, and especially working class women, who rise out of that poverty trap and who move forward. And there's always that tinge, even though the hardship is a reality, the bad conditions are atrocious, but there's always that sense that there's some part of you left behind, something left there.
Yeah.
Teaching, tell us a bit about your teaching experience. How did you find it? First day terrifying?
Well, there was a number of things, because even when I applied to do the PGCE, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and thinking, nobody's going to take me seriously as a teacher. I don't look like a teacher. I don't sound like a teacher. When I did my teaching practice, I was sent to Campbell College, first of all. That was terrifying, but they were lovely. And then I was sent to Orangefield, so there was the two extremes, and actually that's where I met my husband Brian when I was a student teacher in Orangefield, so that wasn't expected. I got a job then in Icefield Girls in East Belfast, and I remember going up, I'd had the interview, I got the job, and they invited me up just to, for another wee visit to the school. And as I came to the front door of the school, it had a wee advertisement on the door, and it said, dinner supervisors needed part-time. And I remember thinking, I'd be handy, I might apply. And then I thought, oh God, no, I'm the teacher, And that was really strange, because the dinner supervisor, the cleaner, that was who I was still in my mind. The girl who actually, when I was teaching in Icefield, the girl who cleaned my classroom, she had went to the same school as me. We had actually been in the same year, only I'd been in the top class and she had been in the bottom class. Now, it wasn't hard to be in the top class of the school I went to, but there you go. And I also remember it was the first parents' evening, and I had a year 10 class, and a girl came in and she saw me standing, and she says, Linda, what are you doing up here? Does your wee girl? I didn't think your wee girl your wee girls were as young as this. And I said, no, I'm the form teacher. You're a liar. Sure you never went to school, So that's a true story.
It strikes me when you said that there is a film that Michael Caine made called Educate and Rita.
Yeah, my husband has mentioned that to me a few times.
It just strikes me. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Brian, and I know Brian, and we've done a number of debates together. So I take it, Brian also was, another turning point in your life.
Yeah. Well, even before that, and this kind of links in with Brian too, another big turning point for me. Well, there was two other things. I had 8 years of psychotherapy, and that was extremely beneficial to me. And it really was quite a journey for me. And I was also saved. And, I come from an atheist background. I would have really prided myself on the fact that I didn't have a faith. I didn't want to be bothered with any of that nonsense. And then I became a granny at 33, and my granddaughter was going to a wee nativity. There would be church services across the road to Sunday school. A neighbour was taking her. And that Christmas was the nativity, and my daughter asked me would I go over with her. And, my attitude very much at that time was, you don't make eye contact with these people. You don't want to hear about their nonsense. You just get in and you get out. And I don't know why, but I just sat there and I wanted to go back. It was a very traditional Presbyterian church, and I happened to be a Presbyterian, but, in name only. And I started taking my granddaughter, Jordan Lee, to church every Sunday, and she would have went into the Sunday school. I sat at the front and I just used to cry and cry and cry. And I didn't understand what faith was. I didn't understand what you were meant to do. I didn't understand because I'd never engaged with it. But I knew I had to be there. And I remember one of the very traditional hymns was Jesus, I can trust thee. trust me with my soul, guilty, lost and helpless, thou canst make me whole. And that just stayed, it stayed in me. And I ended up becoming a Christian, and my faith is very important to me. I struggled with it because I'm certainly not one of the Sunday hat brigade, and there were things in the Bible like, you know, homosexuality and things like that again I struggled with. And for me, there was a lot of reasons not to engage with Christianity. You know, my whole background, I knew my father would be so disappointed because, you know, my family are very tolerant to everything except religion. And, but I just couldn't avoid it. I couldn't resist it. And again, it has been life-changing for me.
It would be amiss of me to not talk about your involvement in the Irish language. But I want to make this point that the Irish language and your Irish language activity is not by any means the sum total of you. You mentioned your very deep held faith. You mentioned Brian. You've mentioned education. You've mentioned mental health. I think sometimes, and I'm a father.
I really haven't talked about Brian. Can I mention Brian?
Absolutely. Let me make one point before we
go ahead.
Brian. I think sometimes we, and I'm much older than you, we think that mental disorder is something that young people have invented. And when the truth of it is that mental disorder has been something that has afflicted people for generations, and it's been left undealt with. And maybe if issues had been dealt with, you know, in a more positive, more professional way, we wouldn't be where we are today with so much mental health. So I want to commend you for making that point. It's very important. So St. Brian, let's talk about St. Brian.
Well, I met Brian when I was a student teacher in Orangefield, and I had just come out of, you know, what had turned out to be a very negative, abusive marriage. And I was getting well. I was still struggling a lot with my mental health, but I was really achieving in education. And this was my second teaching practice. And, you know, I was really focused in. I was working hard. I just wanted to get through this. I wanted to get a job. So I certainly wasn't looking for romance in any way. And there I was in Orangefield. It was a really tough school. And I remember my eldest daughter saying to me, "Mommy, you be careful there," you know, because Orangefield had a very bad reputation. And I said, "But Kelly, you know, I went to Park Parade. That was a worse school." And she says, "I know, Mom, but you were on the other side of the desk then. You weren't the target, you know." So Brian really, you know, he was this lovely man who was a terrible bit of crack, and he was an awful flirt. He never flirted with me, but he seemed to flirt with everybody else. And but he just sat in the staff room. He read his Bible, and I had met David. David was a family friend. He was very friendly with my grandfather and two of my uncles. So, you know, it was a sort of a natural introduction between us. And I would have sat and talked to him every day, but I certainly wasn't thinking about him in that way. And he just took me under his wing. He sort of protected me from the madness that was Orangefield at the time. And then it was my last day in the school when we sort of exchanged phone numbers. But I think we were both terrified. We were both very damaged and scared. And I always say Brian sort of swept me off my feet one toe at a time, because that was May. We had our first date in July, and I think we had our second date in November. So it was a slow burn, but we got there in the end, you know. And again, you know, meeting Brian and marrying Brian changed my life in many ways, because it was having the Ervine name then that I suppose, you know, brought me to prominence, and I'm very grateful for that. But at times I've also, I suppose I've been frustrated by it as well, because, you know, in the early days when people put this label of loyalist down and, you know, and said about, you know, David, and it's certainly no disrespect to David, but that was where my influence was. Well, of course it wasn't. It never was my influence. I voted for David before I ever met David. I voted for him. My family voted for him. We were very supportive of the PUP, coming from, you know, the background that I did. But my influence were my own family. My influence were, their values.
And I think that's very clear. I've heard you speaking in public a number of occasions, and I've known you for a while. And I think that one of the things that strike you is that you're homegrown. Now, by that, what I mean is the conclusions in your life you've reached yourself. You're not easily influenced by anyone. You have a very open mind, I have to say, but you're not someone who follows the herd or has to go in a certain direction unless you think that direction is the way to go. We have 10 minutes of this interview left, and we've covered about 2 weeks of your extensive life. So I want to just, and not because I think that this is who you are, I want to make that point. And I know the language, you're passionate about the language, but how did you drift in that direction? Or did you walk rather than drift?
Well, again, it was totally unintentional. I was teaching. Brian and I had got married. He had become the leader of the Progressive Unionist Party. It was a very stressful time in my life, just because of the busyness of life and because of the position that he had. And I joined, and he kept saying to me, do this to kind of get yourself out of the house and do a bit of something social. I joined a women's group around in East Belfast Mission. Brian and I were members of the congregation there. It was a cross-community women's group, and we did a 6-week introduction to the Irish language, and I fell in love with it. I just was fascinated by it, and I decided that I wanted to learn a few words of it. I didn't know it would end up where it is now. I persuaded a friend to come along with me to classes in Drogheda. And we just enjoyed it. It was very social. I used to meet her on the Armour Road, and we used to walk down, and people were really friendly and welcoming. I loved writing my couple of words. I'd never learned the language before because I never went to school. So this was a whole new venture for me. And I suppose it was just a distraction. I went to the Gaeltacht with Drogheda that summer, and it was just lovely. It was such a social thing to do. I started going to other Irish language centres. I went over to Culturland, I went to the Grafton, I went to Inadavac, and this was a world that I didn't know existed, because it hadn't existed for me prior to that. So it was just a lovely, friendly, sociable, fun thing to do.
When you hear, and whether or not we like it, I think that when you hear that the language for some is engulfed in controversy, or that it's, if you like, it's almost the property of a certain section of our community, does it grieve you? Does it frustrate you?
It grieves me, and I have to be honest, before I started learning Irish, that would have probably been my perception of the language. And even when I started learning, there was a part of me felt, am I doing something wrong? Am I betraying, my own people? And of course I had to understand, I had to make the journey to realise, about Presbyterians and all the different history of the language. So, when I see people's perception of it now, and I have spoken to, young people, young Irish speakers, and I've said, Chucky, our lad doesn't do the language any favours. It just doesn't. And that's not to take away, I'm not condemning somebody for having, a Republican viewpoint. That's fine. But if we allow the language to be caught up too much in the politics and the idea that, again, that it belongs to republicanism, or you have to be a Republican to speak Irish, then we do the language no favours at all. And if we want the language to thrive, then we have to make it open to people from whatever background. I always think that, I'll see the success of my own work when I hear people within the loyalist community, maybe, people with some maybe very right-wing views that I shudder at, but when they're saying those views in Irish, that will be a mark of my success.
We have about 7 minutes left of the programme, which I have to say is fascinating, and you keep taking these curves and turns, and that's the worst that an interviewer can get, because you don't know where to focus, but that's okay, that's good, because I'm enjoying it, and I hope you are as well. Where is Linda now? I know you're recently, in recent weeks, I think, became involved in the Breda GAA club, or
Yeah, it's East Belfast. Well, there's a few things happening with me now. So I just finished my first year at university doing a degree in Irish, and I'm very proud of that, and I want to finish that. We are hoping to open an Irish medium, an integrated Irish medium nursery school in East Belfast. It was planned for this September, but the pandemic caused that a lot of damage, so it's going to be next year. I want to see my own organisation, Turas, thriving and growing. And recently, during the pandemic, I got involved with a few guys from a rugby and GAA background who thought it might be a good idea to see if there was any interest in East Belfast in setting up a GAA club. So they sent a tweet out. They now have 200 members. They were inundated with interest.
Say that slowly.
They put
Members.
We put out a tweet to see if there was anybody might be interested in sort of doing a bit of GAA in East Belfast. They were inundated with replies, and they now have 200 members. They have a Gaelic football team, they have a camogie team, they have a hurling team, and it's just amazing. So I just thought this was a fantastic opportunity for East Belfast. It's cross-community. They've asked me, would I be the president? I didn't know what it was to be a president, so I said, well, I'm really busy, but they said, no, it's only a figurehead. I'm told that a lot of presidents hang over fences and spit and curse, so I said, yeah, no, I can do that. That's no problem. That's fine. So no, it's going to be a wonderful initiative, and another way just bringing people together.
I think you mentioned earlier on, or maybe you didn't, that you're a grandmother now.
I have 5 grandchildren. So my eldest granddaughter is 25 now, and she's over in Scotland with her partner Eilish, and my youngest grandson is 4 and is just about to start P1.
Do you find yourself looking for wee Linda in your grandchildren? Do you find yourself looking for signs of you?
I don't know. I know some of them, especially my wee grandson. Sometimes I think he physically looks like me. I can see my eyes and I can see me in them. My eldest granddaughter, Jordan Lee, who I would have looked after a lot when she was young, she's gay. She's very politically aware. She's she's very left wing. She's very outspoken. So yeah, no, I like to think that I've definitely had an impact there. And I know my 3 children, and I have 2 daughters and a son, and I'm very proud to say that they're all left wing in their thinking. None of them are sectarian, none of them are homophobic, none of them are racist. And I think if I've done nothing else in life, then I've achieved something good with them.
I wake up quite often and look in the mirror and go, where's my hair? Where did it go? Where is it? Do you wake up and go, where is that wee girl? Where did she go?
Well, it's a funny thing. My first name after I got married the first time was Linda Collins, and then I gave up that name when I married Brian. And there have been times, especially when I've been under attack because of the stance I've taken with the Irish language and now with the GAA, that I've just wanted to fade into the background, and I've wanted to be Linda Collins again. And my husband still isn't happy about that, but I said it's no to say disrespect to him. It's just to want the anonymity, because there's times also, and it's been very positive, this journey, but there's times so many people want a wee piece of you, and it's very hard to please everybody. It's very hard to attend everything. It's very hard to keep doing the work, and it's very hard to be a target sometimes. So yeah, there are times I have just wanted to go back and be Linda Collins.
And I suppose I should say to you, and I know you weren't well a while back, I don't know whether you had the virus or you thought you had the virus, but I knew you weren't well. I knew you weren't well. Is there such a thing in your life now as relaxing? Do you ever take it easy?
I think the pandemic has really taught me a lot of lessons that I've I've been so busy for 8 years. I haven't stopped for 8 years, working day and night, working weekends, and now then I just had to stop, partly because of the lockdown and partly because I was sick. And I'm enjoying working from home, but I'm also enjoying having time to myself, doing things that I want to do, and just spending time in my own home has been lovely. I bought pot plants, and I go out and water the flowers out in the backyard. And so I think it's a lesson for me in the future. I've got to find a bit of balance between doing a job that I love, studying Irish, which I love, but also making time for just sitting down and relaxing.
The life that you have lived is remarkable in every sense. The educational journey alone is remarkable. Is there anything left which is attainable? Is there anything left undone? Anything that you're kind of keeping for the year after?
Well, I want to be fluent eventually in the language, or as fluent as possible, if I can live long enough. And I want to be in a position where I see people from both sides of the community engaging with the language, and the idea that people would think speaking Irish has got anything to do with what religious background you come from or what tradition you come from, it'll just seem ridiculous. I want to live long enough to see that situation. I want to live long enough to see a real peace in Northern Ireland. And I hope that happens.
Well, if you have anything to do with it, Linda, given your track record of success, it will happen. So we've came to the end of the interview. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your contribution for everything. I want to thank you for being my guest. Carmela, my uncle. And no doubt we'll see each other across the debating table somewhere. Give my regards to St. Brian.
I will indeed. Thanks.
Scéalta, from Linda, from me, Slán, Amor.
Slán.